Hi friends and foes, I'm Lisa and I'm here to do a movie review on Freaky. It's my first movie review, so hang in there. Here's my dog Khaleesi and we're gonna get started right away. Freaky is a comedic horror with a Freaky Friday twist that really kind of switches it up from the classic horror genre. We see the main character, Catherine Newton, as a teenage girl, about 17 years old, and she is like the basic teenager that you kind of expect to get murdered right away. And then we have Vince Vaughn as the murderer. It's kind of nice to have Vince Vaughn in something memorable again after not seeing him in anything in a while. Like the last thing I can remember Vince Vaughn being in is the breakup with Jennifer Aniston, and we all know that wasn't the best film. So we'll go back to Freaky though. It kind of has a way of blending comedy with horror really nicely, and I found that there's a lot of pros and cons to this movie, but I found it overall had a better pro list than con list. And I'll get right into what the movie's about. The movie starts off like any typical teen horror film, where we have a bunch of teens sitting outside drinking by a fire, doing, teen like activities. When, of course, they inevitably split up and they get slaughtered and murdered one by one. The thing I really enjoyed about the beginning of this film is that you find right away that the killing isn't really as typical and as cliche as you would expect from a horror film. So I don't know about you, but I watch a lot of horror movies, and I find that a lot of the horror movies have gotten really like kind of boring with the way they murder people. Not to sound like a murderer myself, but I just really appreciate when the killings in movies can be creative and a little bit more exciting than just the typical stabbing with a knife or shooting with a gun or something like that. These ones have a creative twist to most of them and ways that I wouldn't have thought that they could kill someone on screen. And I really enjoyed watching people get murdered in fun ways. After the murderer kills those teenagers in the beginning, he passes by this really strange, creepy knife that it is explained that the girl's father collects. It's like an art collection, and it starts glowing, and this guy obviously takes it, the murderer, who they call the butcher in the town. He's like infamous, and everyone knows about him, and there's a classic story told about him, and apparently he had killed in the 90s, and he's back again. Whoa. So we meet the main character, Millie, a timid, shy teenage girl who we find recently lost her father in, I don't think it mentions how. And then we have her taking care of her mother, who we soon find out has kind of an alcohol dependency, and her sister, who is a cop in the town. So she goes to school, and we find out that she's constantly being bullied by the kids around her, being mocked, being having things said behind her back, being openly physically abused by like the boys, and even some of the teachers are even like abusive and like really cruel to her. So after school, Millie is the school mascot, and she goes to a school football game. She is tormented once again, and at the end of the game, she's waiting for her mother to pick her up. And unfortunately, her mother never shows up, and it shows her with a wine bottle, drunk on the couch essentially. So Millie tries to call her sister, but her phone dies before the call is able to go through all the way. So Millie then sees the butcher and prays it isn't the butcher, but unfortunately it is. Millie goes running, the butcher chases, and inevitably, of course, she gets caught by the butcher. The butcher catches her, pins her to the ground, and stabs her in the left shoulder. Immediately after being stabbed, the butcher then seems to be stabbed right after as well. After she gets stabbed and the butcher has the same, her sister shows up and fires a gun, which scares off the butcher. He runs off, and Millie is saved. It goes to a montage at night of some creepy, disturbing images, and Millie wakes up, or so we think, and clearly it is now the butcher that's in Millie's body and Millie who is in the butcher's body. This is where the film kind of gets funnier and a little lighthearted, and you see how it's a really good job of Vince Vaughn to be playing a teenage girl in a grown man's body. He kind of has these funny little quirks of like a giggle that he does, and he does like these really interesting things where you can tell it's like a teenage girl without actually knowing. And the movie does a good job of switching the bodies. So Millie, the character, so Catherine Newton, she does a very good job of being like this very cold, very silent, like stone cold killer face, and she does a really good job of acting like a serial killer. So we see in the film, obviously, shenanigans happen and hijinks, and Millie has to try and convince her family and friends that she's Millie and not the butcher. And I don't want to spoil too much of the film. Go get your toy. Go get it. Go get your toy. Go get it. Where's your bunny? She's going to get it. So this movie follows the same horror movie cliches that you're used to seeing with teen movies. Like, don't go anywhere alone, don't have sex, and misbehaving teenagers usually die first. However, this movie continuously surprised me with its humor throughout the film and its really good use of horror mixed with comedy. It also had a lot of new things that I really appreciated, like adding in new pop culture. I would say that this is like a new genre of horror that we'll see a lot more in coming films. And as I mentioned before, the murdering is a lot more creative and a lot more fun, if you ask me, and a lot of the characters actually end up deserving it. It can get a little bit gory for those of you who aren't as much of a fan of the gore, but I do enjoy it, and if you're anyone like me and you enjoy the little bit of slaughter and a little bit of murder, then you're gonna really like the parts where they get killed in new and unexpected ways that you haven't seen in previous films. The cast is fairly young and fairly new, and you won't recognize as many people as you'd think. Catherine Newton and Vince Vaughn were probably the only two people I recognized easily. The rest are all fairly new actors that you've probably seen in other things, but they're new and up and coming, and they all did a great job in the film. All the jump scares and the spooks and the creepy parts that you expect to happen when they're going to happen typically don't happen when you think, which is again a nice change for horror movies, because if you've seen a lot of horror movies, you always know that when they open the cupboard there's going to be someone behind the cupboard when they close it, or when they bend over they're going to look up and there's somebody right there. But most of these don't come when you expect, which is a really nice change and is really refreshing. One of the scenes I wanted to talk about was when the butcher in Millie's body gets led away by a teenage boy to be cornered by two other teenage boys. And it's kind of like insinuated that the three of them are gonna force something upon her, which is a little uncomfortable, but spoiler once again, they do get what they deserve. There is another scene where Josh, an openly gay character, is led away by another teenage boy who seems to be trying to experiment with his own sexuality, but does it in a forceful and kind of weird way. And Josh refuses his rejections, to which the character uses a very offensive word that I will not be repeating. And it's like very self-aware, and it makes it kind of light and a little bit humorous, but it is something that was a little cringe and a little uncomfortable to watch for me personally. But I did find it, again, he gets what is coming to him, as every character in a movie, at least horror genre, gets. Freaky overall was a very good campy watch. It's a movie that you're going to enjoy if you like kind of that gory stuff, that funny humor, that lighthearted stuff, and that you can't take too seriously. The ending for me was a little bit cliche, which was a ton of turnoff for the rest of the film, but I still found it really enjoyable, and I really liked the acting done, I really liked the writing, and I overall would recommend this movie to anybody. I hope you liked my review. I hope it gave you enough information about the film. If you have any more questions, shoot me a comment, shoot me a like, and hopefully the next video will be better. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.